Good evening and welcome on behalf of the New York Society Library. I am Sarah Holliday, as you may all know already, but nice to see you all from the library's event staff. And I'm just here very briefly to say welcome and say a very quick word about tonight's presenters. We're delighted to have with us this evening Nabil Ayers and Jami Floyd to talk about Nabil's unique memoir, My Life in the Sunshine. Nabil Ayers is the president of Beggars Group US, one of the world's largest, most influential independent label groups. He also has his own record label, the Control Group / Valley of Search, and performs as a drummer. He's written about race and music for the New York Times, NPR, Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, and GQ. Jami Floyd is a lawyer, civil rights journalist, and author, currently at work on a book about Justice Thurgood Marshall. In September 2022, she launched Jami Floyd Media to champion stories about Black excellence, women, the LGBTQ experience in television, film, theater, and online. Her career in broadcast journalism spans network, cable, and local television, as well as broadcast radio and digital media. She's interviewed countless players on the American landscape, but mentioned here that she still considers her interviews with Myrlie Evers Williams, widow of the slain civil rights leader Medgar Evers, to be her most meaningful. That's very cool. About My Life in the Sunshine, author and actor John Hodgman says, "You'd think it would be enough that Nabil has this first-hand and vital perspective on family, music, and race to offer, but he also had to go ahead and be an amazing writer to boot. Thoughtful, generous, wise, and essential." So you can get your copy of the book right here after the event. My friend Marie Louise will be selling them. And just to let you know, you are extremely welcome to ask questions after the main part of the presentation. We are recording this evening. It's not live stream, just recording. So you will be recorded if you ask questions, but we can also edit the recording. So no pressure if you And please join me in welcoming Nabil Ayers and Jami Floyd.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
And Nabil and I chatted a bit beforehand, and we thought, given that this is a nice, intimate gathering, if y'all want to jump in with a question along the way, you can do that too. How do we feel about that?
All right.
Right?
Yeah.
Why not?
It's casual.
We could even eat a little meal here, but we're not going to do that. I'm always thinking about food. All right, Nabil. So let's, I have notes. Forgive me for looking at my phone because my other device, which is just a bigger version of the same thing, didn't download. Somehow an iPad is less rude than a phone. But I hardly need the notes because we're just going to chat a bit. Let's talk about how we met.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I think folks might find that interesting, but I'm going to let you tell it since
Sure.
you're the guest of honor.
Oh, thanks. And I think it was 2018 we decided. 2017, 18, right when I was kind of starting to write and starting to publish things and to think more about my racial identity and my father, and of course lived in New York where there are lots of opportunities to kind of explore those things. I saw something about the Other Box project, which you were working on, but I didn't know you at the time. It was this was an event at WNYC that was something about exploring mixed race parenthood, and I saw this and I was like, oh, this is right down my street. This is something I'm so interested in right now, something I'm reading about, something I'm writing about. And I had some friends at WNYC, so I went to the event, and I remember you came out and did the big intro, and I really remember thinking, like, wow, who is this like powerhouse that just showed up that is talking about these things that I'm so interested in. Yeah. But it really was. It's quite, you were quite compelling, just the energy and everything, and then the whole event was great. And so John Chow, my friend who worked at WNYC at the time, I emailed him the next day and said, can you give me Jami Floyd's email? I would like to cold email her and invite her to lunch. And I did.
And we had a fabulous lunch.
You replied, right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what makes this interesting for me is, now I'm a person who actually thinks we should brag about our age. So I was born in 64. Nabil, you're 71? 72. I know because I just read the book. So I'm a bit older, but I come and I don't want to give away the fabulous secret we have in store for all. When we were coming up, and certainly when I was coming up, and I think a lot of people in this room are going to understand this, being a biracial person, and I am biracial, sometimes people look at me and they don't fully appreciate that, but it was unusual. Loving versus Virginia happened after I was born.
Wow.
So as I think I said to you when we first met, I was illegitimate in the eyes of the law for
Right.
several years, and
Illegal.
you came along just after the
Right.
court said, okay.
Right, right.
So we were delighted, I was delighted, I don't wanna say you were
No, I was
delighted.
delighted
I was
too,
so
yeah.
excited, Nabil, where have you been all my life? So my question for you, Nabil, and then I wanna take a deep dive into your background, but more generally, what's your experience when, and then we had the New York thing in common, the Greenwich Village thing, it was so exciting.
Yeah.
But what is your experience when meeting another mixed race, we used to say mixed race, multiracial didn't exist, right?
Right.
Person. Do you have this immediate sort of kismet bond? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, or is it not necessarily a thing for you?
It's a thing. This is one of the things we were just saying, that my book came out in June, and that I've done a lot of book events and had a lot of different conversations, and that over time in these several months, my answers and my feelings have changed. I haven't been asked this exact question, but my answer is different now than I think it would have been several months ago, because I've met so many people and talked about it so much. I definitely do feel, or I want to feel, an immediate kinship. And I think that's a natural thing that people do. I think for some reason, people of, whatever, any commonality, not necessarily race, but anything that people have in common. You see people in the same t-shirt who like the same band see each other, and it's immediately like, hey, people like to have things in common, and race is definitely, for a lot of people, an identifiable thing, and sometimes that unidentifiable thing is the thing when we're both looking at each other. So I certainly thought that, and especially with you, because I knew that that's what you were interested in talking about. But so I feel that, but what I've certainly noticed throughout my life is that it doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a lot. There are so many different experiences in whatever the mixed race world, meaning like just because we're mixed race does not mean we have the same experience in any way. And I've had plenty of people who I've gotten along great with, have similar stories, and we're hippies, and we have so much in common. This is what it's like for us. But I've also had, one of the first things I wrote that I was really scared to write was this piece for The Root in 2017 maybe, which is a very black publication, and I talked about my mixed race background and that the fact that I didn't really feel like I identified as black and certainly not as white, and I hadn't had that hard of a time. I'd been lucky and had a good childhood, and people leave comments on The Root, and people really left comments, and they were really, it was a lot of like, screw you and your lucky life, and I've had some of that as well, so I certainly can't say like, yeah, we're all the same, we're all great. They're, really just, so that's what I mean when I say I want to feel that kinship when I see someone or learn about someone, but it's not always there. There's so many different experiences.
So having had that experience, writing for The Root and some other things you've written and the comments you can receive, what emboldened you or called you to take on a project like this where you lay it all bare? And not only do you run the risk, well, tell us about the process. I mean, the courage it took to encounter the facts of your own life and background, and then waiting to see what the reception was.
Right, putting it out
Why
there.
would you do such a thing?
Right, that's a really good question. I think there are several reasons. So this all started for me around 2016. I have a great job. I'm the president of a record company. I've been there since 2019. It keeps me very busy. I love it. But I'd stopped playing music several years before. I still consider myself a drummer, but I don't have a drum set in New York. I never play. My friend and I, who owned a record store in Seattle for a long time, sold it in 2016. And even though I wasn't involved day to day, it was still very much part of my identity. And to me, it was another creative outlet. It was something else that I did that wasn't the job that I get paid to do. And I think I hit this weird moment right around 2016 when I realized, I'm 44 at the time. I work for this record company, they pay me, and that's what I do. Like, I've never been someone who just does one thing. I've always had a band and a record store and a record label, and always liked the fact that sort of one thing fuels the other. And that's when I started writing. And I think writing kind of filled the sort of creative void that started missing right around then, when I was writing the fun stories about being in a band and touring in America, and it was crazy, and about the record store, really funny stories and everything. And my wife, who I just started dating at the time, said, this is all really fun, but what you need to do is write about your father and your race, because I know you're interested in that, and I think other people will be interested in that. And so I started doing that completely in secret, basically. Nobody knew. She knew I was doing it, but she wasn't I didn't need to report to her. I could have also not been doing it. She wasn't expecting me to say, here, I did it, which is what happened. But so I was just on, weekends and mornings and whenever I had free time, I was just really loving writing, was digging into it, started writing a lot about my father and my race, and I don't think it would have worked if someone had said, hey, will you write a book? It's due in whatever, a year. It only worked because no one was asking me to do it. I was writing with so much safety because in my head I was like, no one ever needs to see this. I'm seriously the only person that knows this is happening. I'm the only person who gets to decide if anyone ever sees it. So I wrote a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have written if there was any expectation. And eventually, and I wasn't trying to write a book, I was just writing and maybe in my head thinking, wow, what if I could, through writing all these different things from different parts of my life, what if I could come up with a great 1,500 word piece that I might be able to publish in the New York Times or something like that. That was, if anything, that would have been the goal. And I would have been able to choose, of course, which little piece that was. But eventually, there was just so much of it, and I really liked it. And I'd done the sort of emotional hard work of making it exist. And I thought, like, wow, I wonder if this could be a book. And so I didn't think it could be a book until I almost wasn't a finished book, but had like the bones of a book, and I was the only one who knew about it. And I think that was what drove me to write it. Now putting it out in the world is the bigger part of the question, but I think this is also a newer answer, but I think it's true. I think I've had a really hard time talking about these things with anyone, and I think it was easier for me to write a 320-page book and put it out than it was to have a 3-minute conversation. I really do.
So interesting. Wow.
It's never, I've always, whenever anyone asks about my father or my race or anything, I try to get out of it as quickly as I can. And all of my friends would probably acknowledge this. To the point where I was really nervous that people I've been friends with for 20, 30, 40 years would read this and think like, I thought we were friends, I didn't know any of this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, with that in mind, would you read some to our new friends here?
Yeah.
Okay. Here,
So organized.
I will allow you to select whatever section you wish.
I'll select this one, I think. This is the introduction, which is a good place to start for people who might not be familiar because it's the introduction. This is called Straight Outta Compton. When I see a movie theater advertising Straight Outta Compton, I know how I'm about to spend the next 2 hours. What better setting, I think, to watch a blockbuster about the LA rap group NWA than this, the city from which it emerged. It's the summer of 2015, and I'm in Los Angeles for the FYF Music Festival, where backstage I am repeatedly mistaken for a newly famous director who has made music videos for Kendrick Lamar, Kanye West, and Frank Ocean, and goes simply by his first name, Nabil. When I am introduced to some people, it's telling to hear their voices suddenly become more hip-hop, attempting to drop a bit of street into their words, an affectation they adopt only when they think they're meeting the rap video director. Not that Nabil always elicits a humble apology. People aren't aware that even though he has made videos for hugely famous black artists, Nabil is half white and half Iranian, and looks much more white than I do. While I was hoping to spend today at the festival with the artists I work with, instead, I slowly walk around the newly revitalized downtown Los Angeles, recovering from a terrible case of food poisoning. The thought of seeing Straight Outta Compton in a comfortable, air-conditioned theater is much more appealing than the sensory overload of a crowded music festival. I force down the rest of my banana, guzzle my remaining seltzer, and still feeling weak, buy a ticket to the matinee. Compton begins with a bang. In 5 fast minutes, the Los Angeles police destroy a drug house. Bullets and expletives fly, vicious dogs bark, and armored vehicles smash through residential walls like they're made of paper. And I'm completely sucked in, happy to have my mind numbed by Hollywood action, even if the portrayal is devastatingly true to life. The bombastic opening scene ends, and the ensuing silence is broken by a piano sound, followed by an unmistakably familiar, lazy synthesizer melody. My pulse suddenly feels very present in my body. The song's patient, buoyant pace drives the camera's slow movement, which reveals a bedroom adorned with posters, records, DJ gear, and eventually a teenage boy lying down with his eyes closed and headphones wrapped around his head. The character, meant to be NWA founder and producer, Dr. Dre, wears a Los Angeles Dodgers jersey and hat as he subconsciously airplays the piano, the congas, and the synthesizer along with the song. The overhead shot shows a record spinning with a legible red polydor label at its center. The scene, which contains no dialogue, does everything to convey that Dre is lost in the music. The camera closes in on Dre, surrounded by album jackets, and I brace myself, knowing what I'm about to see. And there it is, one album, standing apart with its white border. A man in a tight yellow t-shirt, a beard, and an afro stands against a bright yellow background. His hand rests confidently on his hip, and he smiles as he looks off camera, radiating casual conviction. I can't read the album title, but I don't need to. I already know the man on the cover. The music is so loud that I physically feel it in my chest and ass. The lyrics offer the first voices in the scene. My life, my life, my life, my life, in the sunshine, blasts from the modern theater speakers, and the chorus of male and female vocals further shakes my weakened constitution. I am alone in a dark movie theater, 3,000 miles from home, feeling skinny and sick and completely caught off guard by the most famous song by my father, Roy Ayers. Everybody Loves the Sunshine was a moderate hit when it was first released in 1976, but it's grown over time. It's been sampled more than 100 times by various artists, including Mary J. Blige, Common, J. Cole, Tupac, Snoop Dogg, and Black Eyed Peas. It's been covered by D'Angelo and Chibo Matto, spanning decades and constantly refreshing itself into modern context. I've heard it in many different iterations over the years, a perennial, persistent reminder of my otherwise absent father. After one very long minute of music, Dre's mother surprises him by turning off the record, which snaps him out of his meditative state. My chest feels hot, and my breath is short. My first reaction is to sink into my cushy chair and look around the theater to see whether anyone is looking at me. Is this what it would feel like to run into him, I wonder? I'd last seen my father 9 years earlier, when I was 34, but that had been planned, a lunch in Seattle, my first ever meeting with him as an adult. The time before that, when I was 11, I had no idea who he even was. Since moving back to New York City where he lives, I'm always slightly, subconsciously on guard, ready to run into him, but I definitely wasn't expecting it in a dark movie theater in Los Angeles while getting over food poisoning. Though my father and I live in the same city and are both in the music business, our paths have never crossed in the 7 years that I've lived in New York. Occasionally, someone asks me how he's doing. It surprises me every time, and I usually respond with something like, "You'd probably know better than I would," which feels confrontational and often leads me to quickly offer a slightly apologetic, less biting explanation that he's never been a presence in my life. How, I wonder, did a hippie child in New York City who never knew his father become a grown man who still didn't know his father, but encountered his music regularly? Were moments like these truly coincidental, or had my father's DNA guided me into a life in music and ultimately to the places where his presence caught me off guard? It's been over a year since I last tried to contact my father, and though I was unsuccessful, I decide it's time for another try. I know he won't be the father I'd never had, but maybe he can become the father I meet for lunch once or twice a year. The father who tells me about his life and my family history. The father who texts me each year on my birthday. He might not respond, but even if my father ignores me, I will have tried. Little do I know in that moment that the impact of that minute in the theater, the intensity of hearing my father's music, my music, in a public place, through huge speakers and staring at his picture on a giant screen, will be the catalyst that opens up 2 centuries of perspective on my family.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Why? First of all, I have to say that I've read that now twice, and then hearing you again, it hit me differently. It sets up the book so beautifully because it's about race, it's about music, your music, his music, the visual of it. It just lays it all out there, and then you go on you take us all on the journey.
Right.
It's not just about a boy looking for his father, it's about all of those things in your life, and you lay it out so beautifully in that moment. But why, Nabil, since you say you'd heard the song, and we all have heard the song so many times,
Yeah.
did it hit you in that particular moment in that way? why did it hit you so hard then and there?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was simply that I felt terrible and felt like a bit weak physically from food poisoning. Part of it was surprise element, which there's always a surprise element because I never expect to hear it, but I hear that song all the time. These days, I don't know, twice a month, easily, sometimes more, from a car driving down the street in Brooklyn, in a bar, in a club, somewhere. It's really...
You're attuned to it.
Yeah, I'm attuned to it, but it's everywhere. It's crazy. In the last couple of years especially, it's in an Apple commercial, it's in a Coors commercial, it's all over the place. Great for him, I hope. But that wasn't someplace I expected it, and usually when I hear it, it's like, oh, I think I hear that in the background, and this was like, with the picture, loud, like it was really like the most intense I've ever heard it, definitely.
In a movie about music.
Right, and watching, and there was, that section was actually longer. I remember working on it with my editor, and there's a bit in there about me feeling actually jealous of Dr. Dre, and me thinking like, when I say my music, that was a lot longer.
I was going to ask what that meant.
Yeah, that meant like, why does he feel so connected to that song? That's my song. Even though it's not really, but in a way there was this little hint of like that's unfair that he gets to be on screen doing that, and I sit here and get surprised by it. That was part of it. So I think there was a lot sort of emotionally and physically going on in that particular setting that made it a lot more intense than just like, oh, it's on the radio right now, that's cool. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you do begin the journey, and you talk about how that moment would lead to this incredible and unexpected sort of adventure forward, but also backward, right? So, I don't want to ask what surprised you most, because there were so many. I mean, even just reading it as a reader, there's so many surprising things. But you were telling me just before we walked in here that even since the book has come out, you continue to be surprised by the things you're learning.
Yeah.
Since the book dropped. So we're talking about a very long exploration for you.
Yeah.
In this process, not just of writing and seeking, but in conversing and engaging.
Right.
Right?
And, yeah,
so say more about that.
Yeah, that's what's been so fun about it for me. I mean, I come from years of playing in bands. You put out a record, you go drive around the country and the world for a year and a half, performing it every night. Sometimes for 20 people, sometimes for thousands of people if you're opening for sometimes for no people, but you do it. And every night, even if there's nobody there, or two people there, those people might be really interesting, and you learn something, and you just explore that city through their eyes. There's so much the experience is the part that's attached. For me, playing music was never just about playing music. I liked playing music. I loved going on tour and meeting people and having fun and seeing friends I haven't seen in a while in different towns and getting these sort of one-day snapshots of cities I'd never been to. And I did that for a long time and really loved it. And so to me, a big part of the book was, of course, I want to write this book, and then I really want to. This is 51-year-old me figuring out a way to still be in a band without setting up a drum set and dealing with other people, which is the two things I definitely don't miss about being in a band. So I've been doing, and I think this might be the 45th book event. I've been really doing a lot, and there's still a lot more, and I don't see a reason to stop it, because especially in some of the more interesting cities, and I just spent a week driving. I did events 5 days in a row in Atlanta, Athens, Georgia, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Nashville, and Memphis, and a lot of that was to explore some of the stuff that happens later in the book, where I learned about enslaved ancestors and where they lived and where they're buried, and so I went to some of these places, and that was fascinating, but also did book events in each of those towns and met people there and really loved it. So it's not just like, I mean, some of it is just incoming. I get a lot of weird Facebook messages and Instagram messages from people who are connected to my father, or sometimes cousins, but really going and showing up in Cleveland and Chapel Hill, some people just want to show up and talk to you and don't message. So that's when it really gets interesting. That's a lot of
family members.
Yeah, family members, or even just people who, I was in Cleveland last week, and some older gentleman came up to me just right away and said, "Last time I was at an Ayers event, it was the worst night of my life." And I was like, I would really like to hear this story. And talked about a terrible date to a Roy Ayers concert in 1979 or something. He'd come to the thing. So it's a lot of that.
I hope this time it was better.
I hope so too, yeah. So that's what a lot of it is for me, is the sort of connection and continuing the story, still learning and digging a lot.
Now, people who come to a book event, I think, expect some spoilers, so,
Right.
and you've already tipped a little bit. What was it like for you to uncover, probably not a stunning surprise, but to begin to uncover some of that painful history of enslavement and parts of your father's history that you hadn't specifically known about, even though
Right.
you might have suspected?
Right. Yeah, and of course I assumed that on my father's side that Americans were enslaved because they were, but I didn't know anything. And so in a way, more than anything, I think it was a relief. It was like, finally, I found this information. And what ended up happening, was the spoiler, is I did 23andMe, and a distant cousin reached out with a family tree, and the family tree had everything. This incredibly detailed document that was written in 1963. My father was on it, his three sisters whose names I knew. Like, it was definitely the right document, and it led back to one enslaved man in Alabama in 1824. And it was pretty incredible to seriously go from knowing nothing to be like, oh, it's just all here, 5 generations, here are pictures of them, here are stories about them, here's everybody's names. It was incredible, but it wasn't really a surprise. It was just a surprise to just get it all in one dump.
Felt
Just
swoop.
documented is crazy. Yeah.
You do wonder about, I remember once talking to my father, so my father, like Nabil, my father was African American, he just passed away in 2015. And whenever I would ask him questions about his family, he didn't have the answers.
Yeah.
He would become, and he was a very strong man, never cried. I think I saw him cry once in his 90 years. But he would become very balled up with emotion because he'd say, well, we don't have that history. We don't know what happened to Aunt Mary. We don't know where Ollie was his grandmother. So we don't know who Ollie's parents were. All that was taken from us. And he died before I did the good homework of, I mean, I didn't do the work, but I connected up with the people who've done the work, same like you, and found all that information.
Wow.
And I, of course, I don't live in the land of regret, but I feel so much for those ancestors who didn't have that information. There was the period of storytelling, and then there was the period of our parent. I guess your dad's a little younger than mine, but the sort of next generation up, they missed everything.
Right.
In the 50s and 40s.
And I think there's also, at least from what I've heard and people I've talked to, there's maybe a generation of people who also just really do want to put that behind
They
and
did,
not
yes.
deal with it
I
and
think
not
that's
talk about
right.
it and not,
Probably some disagreement there.
Yeah.
Like there was probably the sister who wanted to tell the story,
Right,
and the sister was saying, "Stop telling that story."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So okay, so now to our delightful surprise, the book is very much also about the other half of your story, which is your mother.
Right.
Which I guess you didn't know would be the case necessarily when you started writing. So tell a little bit about that, and then we can do our big reveal. Or we can ask people to guess. No, we're not going to do that. We're not doing the Bob McAllister thing.
I mean, well, the quick version is that it's a unique situation in that my mother met my father at a jazz club in New York. My uncle, my mother's younger brother, is a jazz musician. She was 20, he was 18 when they were at the Village Gate, I think.
Village Gate?
I know, right? Alan, my uncle kind of knew Roy Ayers because they played together a couple times, ran into them, and my mother said to herself, that's the person I'm going to have a child with. Not that's the person I'm going to marry or the person I want to be with, but that's who I want to have a child with. She knew she wanted to be a young single mother, and I hung out with him a few times over the course of a year, and on the last time said to him, I want to have your child, you don't need to be part of our lives. He agreed, and I think most importantly, I've always known that story. So as a kid, it was never, oh yeah, your father left us, oh there was this divorce, none of the things. And this is always interesting because I've talked about this so much in the last several months. A lot of people have a hard time with it or with understanding it. And maybe why I wasn't angry at my father as a kid, I become angry with him later as an adult when I finally do try to connect with him and that fails. But
we all get angry with our
as a
fathers
kid,
as we get older.
but if he ever came up, my mother and my uncle would say something like, oh yeah, he was a really great, charismatic, talented guy and he gave us you. Like that. Those were the things I heard.
Let's say that your mom is here.
Let's say that she is. Yes.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Mom. Louise. This is Louise. I did ask permission for the big reveal. And Jim is here as well. The dedication is to Jim, Louise, Louise,
Right, Alan and
Alan
Shannon,
and Shannon, right. For my parents, I
Right.
say, right. And Louise, thank you, and Jim, thank you for being here and for allowing me to bring you into the conversation. I may bring you in a little more in just a minute. But I want you to say more, Nabil, about people. First of all, who has a right to be frustrated? But
Well, that's what's
if
interesting,
anybody
right?
wants to
I know.
express your frustration, go right ahead.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised that people would say more about what you encounter when you tell the story.
It's really just, it's never, I don't feel like I'm being judged. I feel like people are thinking, but I don't get that. Tell me more. That's what it feels like.
So
People
it's
be like,
curiosity.
but you had to have been mad at him. He wasn't there. And I'd say, but he wasn't supposed to be there. I grew up until I was 10 in these sort of idyllic bubbles in Amherst, in New York City, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, where at the time, I want to say we were lucky, but my mother deliberately put us in these places where there are so many mixed race kids, so many kids of different races, so many kids with no money, we were on welfare, food stamps, it didn't matter, and so many kids who only had one parent. I was a totally normal kid, so I think that was a huge part of it. I was not in places where I was weird for not having a father, for having an afro, for any of those things. I was just a normal kid, never had to deal with any weird
And so
questions
cute.
or anything.
It wasn't so cute.
But I think that was a big part of it. So it was never like, where's your father? No one asked me that question until later, till I lived in places where it was weird.
After you were about 10, 11.
Yeah.
So Louise, it sounds like this was very intentional.
Yeah.
When he was small.
Yeah. Intentional to have him or intentional?
Oh, well, yes, to have him, but I mean to
Oh, yeah.
raise him in such
Absolutely.
I don't want to call it bohemian, but an environment that would help him to feel so comfortable.
Yeah, let's see, he was born, we lived in the West Village, because that was, I grew up in Levittown, Long Island, my dream was to live in the West Village.
As we all dream.
Yeah, and so, we lived in the village born in New York, we lived in the West Village. And then my brother, who really raised Nabil mostly from long distance together, but was very much in his life, moved to Boston, because he was in music school, and talked us into moving to Boston. Nabil was 6 months old, but anyway, we moved to Boston, and so this Cambridge is just like living in West Village. I mean, we lived in North Cambridge, and then so young when Nabil was born, I went to college. I went to bachelor's degree and master's degree in UMass and Amherst, and we moved to Amherst not knowing how idyllic it was going to be. I mean, we lived in family housing, and like Nabil said, 90% of the kids had one parent, were of some kind of a mixture of race, or a foreign country, or, so it was just like this wonderful, amazing environment. And then we moved back to New York, to the West Village, to the Red Schoolhouse.
Yeah, it was a fancier version of Amherst.
Fancy version of Amherst.
Still is.
It was very intentional, and also I wanted to be able to be in that type of environment, but also for myself, I wanted to feel like, I had a kinship with other single moms. I wasn't like the one that was like the only single mom. So it was intentional, but it was more idyllic than we ever expected. Not to sound like Amherst was perfect, but it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, kind of
It was pretty amazing.
Please.
Was music part of your life as a young boy?
Yeah,
Yes.
music was always
That,
part of
that
the book.
probably structured you a lot.
maybe.
Gave you a structure
Right.
and a security that you didn't have to really be leaning on a parent.
Right, possibly, yeah. I mean, my Uncle Alan bought me a drum set when I was 2.5 years old. So
You were
I
talented.
always played drums,
So that
right?
was
So,
really
I mean, I
good.
would play drums every day and listen to records. My mother had a big record collection, I had a big record collection. That's always been a huge part of my life.
Can you talk about Canal?
Yeah, and this is, so Alan lived in this, when I was a kid, lived in this loft at 501 Canal, which was like the far west side of Canal, which in the 70s was, like really in the middle of nowhere, like the edge of the earth. It wasn't a bad neighborhood, it was just kind of desolate. It was all those print shops that had been abandoned, maybe people were squatting, and so it was like a lot of artists, a lot of musicians. The whole building, it was him and 3 other musicians who, when they finished Berkeley in Boston, came back to New York, and they had the whole building, 501 Canal, 4-story brick building. Each of them paid $125 for their floor. It was $500 for the whole building. It was a total dump. It wasn't like a cool loft. It was really dump. No heat, no air conditioning.
Right.
The stairs felt like they were gonna fall down. Like, really like, but $125 a month, so no one really worked. They put on concerts weekly on the main floor, which is kind of a retail space that they turned into this concert venue, basically. That's what I have lots of pictures and recordings actually that you're on of me and Alan, me playing drums, him playing saxophone, and you like introducing us as if we're a band when I'm 3 and 4 years
Well,
old.
the one picture of me and Bill,
Yeah,
is from By the Way.
Oh right, the picture that's in the front of the book is from there, yeah.
Yeah,
But it was
the
this
picture
really
the cover of the book is Amherst.
right. But I spent so much time. I mean, we never lived there, but I would spend chunks of time, weeks and months there, and that to me is still New York. That was like the New York of the '70s. That was just magical and not really scary, just so rough, but in kind of a beautiful way.
And the second the second chapter of the book is
I think
Valley.
so. Is it Valley of Search?
Valley of
I remember
Search.
that is, right?
So say a little bit about Valley of Search.
Valley of
It's
Search.
chapter 2.
Yeah, it's an album that Alan released as a saxophone player in 1975. A very like out there avant-garde free jazz instrumental album. That's great. That became sort of a cult record, and I reissued in 2018 to great acclaim, surprisingly, including an interview on All Things Considered with Jami Floyd.
Right.
But
I got to meet Alan. That was
Yeah,
really
right.
sweet. Yeah.
So much fun. But and now
very
he's
fun.
in his 70s and making music and putting out albums, and it's great.
Yeah.
But it all goes back to that.
And it meant a lot, I think, to him that you reissued it,
Yeah.
but it must have meant a lot to you.
It did.
To say a bit about that.
Yeah, and it's all also wrapped up. This is all, I mean, we reissued in 2018, which means the idea probably came in 2016, 17, which again is at the same period of time where I'm kind of thinking, so I just have this job and that's it. And what led to it was he doesn't live in New York right now, but he came and played a concert with Cooper Moore, who's a pianist in New York, who's my godfather and a good friend. And I just posted something about it on Facebook and got lots of messages from like record nerd friends, for lack of a better term. They're like, oh wow, you know about this and everything. I was like, I know. You know about this? I thought this was like a family secret. Then it turns out it had become this cult record that we didn't realize. But there was a bad rip of it on YouTube that sounded terrible, and it was a $100 collector's record. So that's my thought. Oh wow, we should really reissue this and make it available to people in a better format. And in doing so, spent so much more time talking to Alan and really listening to the record more and looking at photos from back then and talking to other people who were there. Like really it became this research project. And as I was doing it, I remember thinking like, oh, well, I should really be writing about this. This is happening right now. This is very much like me reflecting on what New York was like then as a child. So that's what a lot of that part of the book is from me going through that process.
The song that Alan dedicated to you, is it on Valley of Search?
Yes, it's called Little Nabil's March.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
It's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so I learned something about you that I didn't know in this book that we share in common that has, well, I thought it had nothing to do with race, but maybe it does, so you tell me.
Does.
Right? Kiss.
Oh, right.
What?
Yeah, I know. So fun.
So Mom, I snuck to a Kiss concert when I was a kid. My parents still don't know. My father would kill me if it was still on, but I think my mother would probably forgive me now. She's softened a lot now that it's gone.
Where and when?
I think I was about 11 or 12. It was here in New York.
Oh,
I was very young. I was a rowdy
but that's
kid.
that's the age group. Right? That's the
Yeah,
demo.
so they don't want to hear about me. That's my book. We'll talk about
Oh,
that.
wait, do you remember where it was? Was it MSG or was it
I think
someplace smaller?
no, it was big. It was big.
Okay.
It had to have been the garden.
Wow.
It was big, and I was so nervous. I didn't even have a good time because I was so afraid my father would kill me. I got there late, left early, stressed out the whole time about my father. So I didn't even have, you know that feeling? You're not even having a good time. You're so stressed out. Why are you doing it? I had the same. We had the same dad. I used to go to CBGBs all the time.
Wow.
Oh my God. Also not having a good time. Oh my God, why did I go in there? Okay, so back to Kiss.
Yeah. So.
Why do you think that's about race?
Come
Come up with something.
No, I've got. I mean, you're egging me on. You already know.
No, I really. Well, I saw Kiss in the book,
Right.
and I saw your sort of musing about why you were drawn
Yeah.
to Kiss.
I mean, a lot of it was, of
But
course,
why
just the
would
like.
we both be
Yeah,
interested?
I remember seeing Destroyer, the album, which is a very iconic record cover, just the four of them kind of standing on top of this burned out, bombed out city.
And they have the makeup. You
Yeah,
don't
of course,
remember
this is
Kiss.
definitely the makeup. I remember seeing that
Which
and
is-
being a 5-year-old and just thinking, oh, well, obviously this isn't made for me. And buying that record, buying with my money, the first record I owned on my own when I was 5. We had a lot of records at home. And playing it constantly, like memorizing everything, the fan club address, like really just like, when you had a record then, like there was no online.
Well, I
TV,
know,
like,
you have to
you-
write.
This is the thing. So I was just like reading it over and over again, learning everything, loved the music, loved the whole thing. And I think honestly realized, I mean, even then when I was 5, I knew I wanted to be in a band. I was already playing drums. And we had lots of records, but like the Beatles records we had, I would look at them and think, well, I definitely don't look like those guys. They're
Right.
very pale, they have this straight hair. I'm never going to be in the Beatles. This is the 5-year-old brain, this is also the 51-year-old brain. Like you identify with the people who you see who are doing what you want to do. But also I would look at a Stevie Wonder record and think like, wow, look at how like nice and round his afro is. Mine was like this home cut mess. It was, no offense, it was a real like lumpy hippie thing. And of course his skin was much darker than mine. I was like, well, I don't look like any of these people either. But Kiss, for some reason, because I mean I knew they were white Jewish guys from New York because my mother told me so, but there was something about the fact that I could put on the makeup, which I did and had pictures of, and dress up like them, and then I looked like I was in Kiss. And so they were weirdly the doorway that was like, oh, but I could be in that band.
Right,
'cause I could put on
anybody
the makeup.
could.
Right. And it really did, it was an identity thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Why the drums? As opposed to guitar
Right.
or
I guess
singing?
I think
or-
because as a kid you hit things. You know, and I think it's probably someone's like, oh, he's a drummer, and then and there was this also is in the book, but
Louise was thrilled by that.
but she was, but we had a good friend also,
I was.
or she had a friend who I never met, Marzette Watts, who's a fairly well-known musician who apparently came by. He'd been friends with but hadn't talked to in a while, and then right after you had me, he had come back from Africa, and he and his wife came by and said, hey, we heard you had a son. Here's a drum. He's going to be a drummer. So that might have helped. There was this like beautiful African drum that there's lots of pictures of me with as a kid that I remember. Like, but it was just like one, kind of boom boom thing.
Mhm,
But that turned into my uncle actually buying me a drum set. And I think it was just always there.
mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. Anybody else have questions? Because I have 100. So if you all don't jump in, you jumped in. So thank you for getting us the music. Appreciate that. It was a good thought. Please go ahead.
This is a little weird. Okay. So
Great.
Weird is great.
when you said, I was at this concert and I was so stressed that my dad was gonna kill me and he would have killed me for doing this, he didn't want me. What was going through your head when she
At the Kiss
mentioned about
concert.
this like
Yeah.
loaded emotional time in her youth?
Right.
Talking about, I mean, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. My dad's gonna kill me. There's like
Mhm.
obviously this strong emotional connection there.
Yeah.
So maybe nothing was going through your head, but I'm wondering
Oh, there's a
if
lot.
you
Yeah.
It's a
might
great
have
question.
reacted.
Yeah.
It's a great
I
question.
mean, so I was 7. This is at Madison Square Garden. And you were probably there a little bit before me, which was probably a better tour, actually. Not the same night. This is
I
at the tail end of the
Destroyer, I
original.
think.
But so I was 7, and my mother took me. So there's certainly no. That's a huge difference.
More than once.
Right, yeah, but that's a huge difference. There was no like, oh, am I gonna get in trouble for being here? I was there with my mother, so that was part of it. But I remember, I mean, I'd already seen so many bands by the time I was 7, but I hadn't seen anything like that. I'd seen lots of jazz and like things literally in places this size or in clubs, but suddenly there's 20,000 people. Everyone's smoking, obviously, since 1979. So it's like full of smoke.
Probably dying now.
Everyone looks older because they're probably all teenagers, but to me they all look like adults. And I just remember it was so loud, it was so bright. There were the explosions, there were the huge Kiss lights, all of that stuff, and it was sort of terrifying, but not in a I want to leave or something bad is going to happen way. In a like really stimulating, exciting way. I was really scared. Like. People were throwing fireworks. It was in July. I remember there were actual that was even scarier than the stuff on the stage. There were fireworks flying down from the balconies. It was crazy. It was a rock concert in 1979. So I was scared, but I was also, and I had this a lot at concerts when I was a kid. This weird fear. I knew I wanted to do that so bad, and that created a different kind of fear. This like fear. Yeah, there's definitely like this. how can I do that? There's something scary about thinking I could do that or wanting to do that, and that sometimes made me feel weird and bad almost at concerts.
But was your question about, I wonder if we were at any of the same Kiss concerts. Was your question about, okay, so I had this father who was gonna kill me and was a presence in my life until the day he died. And it was a very, I don't know about you and your dad, but my father was, I mean, even when I was 55, it was like, oh my God, what's my father gonna say about this? And Nabil's relationship with his father is such that he never had to worry about that. Is that what your question was going to?
Yeah.
Ah.
So then when I say, oh, my father was gonna kill me at this concert,
But you don't
What goes
like
through you?
talking about it, so maybe we shouldn't
Oh no, I'm happy to talk about it now. Now it's I'm here to
but
talk
definitely buy the book.
I mean that's interesting. So that to your I see what you meant when you said maybe you're thinking nothing. Definitely thinking nothing. He did not exist in my brain during that Kiss concert. It was not. I mean,
But tons of people have distant fathers.
But but I think a lot more people have distant fathers where there was a divorce or where the father left or where there had been a relationship and now there wasn't. There's maybe some piece of like he left me, I'm mad, and I
Or he
really
lies.
didn't have that as a kid.
Your
For lots of
situation's quite
reasons.
unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he never came up in situations. He would only come up. I mean, we went and saw him play live a few times, and that was interesting. Otherwise, he would come up when we ran into him on the street, which would actually happen, which is crazy.
So you were like creating, like, because it was such a unique story, and other people even really couldn't give you room for it. You know, what do you mean you have this? You know,
Right.
it was difficult for people to even fathom that you had this unique story. So you were creating it. You were creating your framing, where you were creating your own belonging, right?
You mean in writing the book?
Yeah.
Or-
Yeah, and doing all this stuff.
I think so. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it too, to me, in writing the book, and this is much of an afterthought too that I don't think I realized till recently, is especially once I tried, so more spoilers, when I was 34, 35, I finally decided it's time to get a hold of him. I lived in Seattle at the time. He still tours. He was touring a ton back then. He came to Seattle all the time, once a year or something, and I never thought anything of it. I just like see it in the paper and be like, oh, whatever. And one year I finally thought, you know, he's almost 70, I'm in my mid-30s. I think I should try to get in touch simply because I want medical history and family history and things like that, or at least that was the reasoning I used. And I didn't have a way to. I asked my mother, she didn't have a way to, so I just found his booking agent online. Kind of, long story short, he easily got back in touch, called me, we made plans to have lunch, had this lunch in Seattle that was so easy and normal and connective and really cool. And so at that point, that's when I thought, wow, well, cool. I don't want anything from him except to maybe do this once or twice a year. He got off really easy. He should be so excited right now. He doesn't have to do anything. And then it became really, he would not answer the phone or be really quick with me and kind of hang up. And that's when I finally felt like, okay, I'm pissed at him. And that's so, I can't remember what my point was though. It was going back to something else.
She asked about your creating your framing.
Oh, right. So I think actually in writing the book, and so at that point, this is somewhat I talk about here when I kind of go through these phases every couple of years where I'd be like, I'm going to try to get a hold of him again. I lived in Seattle. I'm in New York. I'm going to call them or I'm going to do something. I would go through these kind of, do them in chunks where I'd maybe call 3 times in a couple of days before I went to New York. And then I would not do it for 6 months because it would make me feel terrible because I'd be wondering if he's going to call back or if he's going to answer. And writing the book and putting out there to me really made it feel like, in a very positive way, not in a negative way, like he had all the power in those years, and putting this out there gave me all the power, where I'm not wanting anything from him, I'm not trying to get a hold of him, and there's something about it that really shifted when the book came out. And I don't know if I knew I was trying to do that, but it definitely happened.
Do you know that he's read the book?
I don't know.
Will you
We're
send
still
me a
not in
copy?
touch, but I didn't send him a copy because I don't have his address, but I do. I did email. I have one. So he has 2 kids. He got married soon after I was born. Is still married to that woman. They have 2 kids who I call his real family. They grew up with him. They're 2 and 4 years younger than me. Daughter who lives in New York. I've tried to get in touch with. She's never gotten back to me. The son who lives in North Carolina. I did go meet. This is all in the book. And so he's the only contact I have to that family. And so I did email him about 6 months before the book came and said, this is coming, you're in it, everyone's in it, it's, if you want to tell people I'm not in touch with anyone, you should let them know, and I'll send you whatever, an early version or a copy if you want. And he just replied like, LOL, congrats, something like that. And so to me, that was everything I could do. I wasn't going to try harder. And so,
Did you have a sense of his connection to abandonment? That it must have been when you looked at his history, that in some way, someone, a father or an important person, withdrew from him, had abandoned him.
right.
And you're quite sensitive, so I had the feeling that you could have picked that up, but at the same time you had your own pain about that. But there was some.
Yeah, I wonder.
You're too engaging for him to have just dropped out. You must have scared him in some way.
Thank you.
The connection must have scared him.
Right. Maybe. I mean, the interesting thing is that, again, to go back to the, like, people don't totally get it, he didn't abandon me.
Right.
Well, but
Maybe he did when I was 35.
Well, when you connected to him.
Right.
And he probably got a lot from
Potentially
that.
then he
But
did.
then I
Right.
think it scared him.
Right.
There
At a
was
time when it
something-
would have been so easy to be like, cool, we can have lunch
That's
once a
right.
year, no problem.
Or
Yeah.
at the very least, to explain why he doesn't want to recant.
Right.
If there's some reason why it's too hard for
Mhm.
him, either with his other life,
Mhm.
or with his life, I shouldn't say other
Yeah.
life, with his life, or just emotionally,
Emotional.
just deal with it, man, and explain it,
Right.
right? But we
Yeah.
so often in life choose to just hang up quickly
Mhm.
or say LOL or
Right.
rather than have a hard conversation
Yeah.
that we need to be having with ourselves,
Right.
not with the other person, with ourselves.
But there was an amazing moment, this is in the book, it's one of my favorite parts of the book, where I eventually meet, giving away a lot, eventually meet my aunt, my father's sister, who I didn't know was alive. This is 3-4 years ago, not that long ago. In Los Angeles, she agrees to take me to my grandparents' graves. We're buried together.
Mhm.
So me and this woman who looks like she could be my mother, was wonderful, I got along great with, we're there, and she does this we're standing over the two grandparents' grave, and she does this introduction to my grandmother, and she's like, I love Nabil, he's such a nice young man, talking about me again. This really incredible intro where we're locked at elbows, it's so amazing. And then she goes, okay, ready? And I say, what about Grandpa? And she goes, oh, he doesn't care. That was, to your point about my father,
so interesting.
that really was like, ding! There's something going on here.
One of my favorite parts is where you write, and I hope I'm getting the quote, my little tabbies fail me, but I did write,
Okay.
you write quote about Mom. She never apologized for her decision to have me, knowing that he wouldn't be around. An apology was never expected. And that gets back to the point that this is what we all agreed to, or at least they agreed to. You didn't really agree.
Well, I don't have a choice, right?
You didn't have a choice. But, acknowledging that Louise is in the room, can you say more about the conversations that you had, mother and son, as you got older, and certainly as you started to contemplate writing this book?
Yeah. I don't remember having a lot of conversations. Maybe you remember differently. I mean, the thing that I always thought was interesting, when I went away to college, so we lived in Salt Lake City, then when my mother met and married Jim, she moved to Berkeley, California, so I was in college outside of Seattle, and then lived in Seattle for a long time, and she lived in Berkeley, and he would play in Berkeley or Oakland or somewhere around there fairly often, and I knew that I never saw him in those days, but you would sometimes go see him to say hi and to give him my band's newest CD, right? That was something that you did, and he would tell me about it. And so those were the only conversations I remember. Once every couple of years, you would say, I saw Roy a couple nights ago, like usual, he was really quick, really busy, but he was really nice, and I gave him your new CD. And that was, those are the only conversations I remember us having ever. Am I forgetting things though? Did we have
No,
more?
I don't think it, well, it's like you said at the beginning of the conversation here, it wasn't like a big, this is how it is.
It wasn't something to ask about, yeah.
But when you got ready to write this book,
Yeah.
did
Oh,
you feel that you should call Mom and say,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
thinking of writing a book?
Yeah, that's when it started. Go
Well,
ahead.
not really so much, well, yeah, that, but also Jim and I were the first, and
First readers?
Right, we're the first readers.
Oh, that's great.
We were fact readers to start with, and we did editing, and then.
But it was far along
In
though,
fact,
so.
it's obvious because some of this recollection has to have made Louise.
Yeah, there's a lot, yeah.
Or even things like when we went to visit my grandfather, and we all lived in New York, we all lived in Brooklyn now, but we would go visit my grandfather in Brooklyn, so Nabil had a great grandfather until he was 11, and Nabil would write, and we took the Q train, I'm like, well, wait a minute, the Q train wasn't there,
Right, right.
It was a G and some other train. So,
New York fact checker.
Yeah, that's clear.
Right.
Yeah,
yeah, things like that.
But I did, yeah. I remember the first time was at the hospital nearby. This was right when I was kind of starting to write a lot. Jim was having a procedure. We spent all day together in the
Yeah.
hospital, and it happened to be the hospital where I was born.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you just started talking, and I was like, well, I know I'm here for the next 12 hours. Do you mind if I type?
do you mind if I record?
So it's sort of an interview, but it wasn't
My
meant to be an interview. It was really just, we had a lot of time to kill, and you were in a
It's a
place where
blessing.
you wanted to talk about
Blessing.
things. But we definitely also did, I recorded some actual interviews with you and with Alan as well.
And with Alan.
Yeah.
And one thing I will say is, I did develop to see kids when he was 7, at age 47, when he was 47, he invited me to see kids, and we went to Madison Square Garden again. And it was all like grandmas and people with
Yeah.
their
It looked like a lot of the right people with the same idea. Right? Returning the favor, yeah.
Great, we were like, and it was so safe and so completely.
Right, right. No one was smoking. Yeah, no one was throwing fireworks. Yeah.
Well, that's a lovely note. Sarah, go ahead.
I'm just gonna throw in a question.
Yeah.
No, please go ahead. I think we're at a good point, so you probably should get the last question unless somebody has a burning.
That's great, or yeah, we'll see how it goes. So you've written and obviously thought critically about music for a very long time, and then written this book. How did writing and thinking deeply about music prepare you or not prepare you to write this story? How did you kind of think
It's-
of the question?
It's sort of, to me, writing is more related to drumming and playing music. Certainly not really to like writing about or even thinking about music, but it's really rhythmic to me in that there are lots of like paragraphs and sentences and phrases that I could tell weren't done, not because they didn't say what I wanted to say, but because, for lack of a better explanation, they just didn't feel like I wanted them to feel. And it had to have like a different cadence or a different, it was definitely a musical rhythmic thing where I could just tell like, that is what I mean, it just doesn't feel right, or it doesn't land, or there's like a weird missing beat at the end of it. Like that happened a lot. And I definitely looked at it as if, you know, especially because I work for a record company, we release albums, and these days when an artist releases an album, we put out a first single, we put out a second single, we put out a third single, then the album comes. When I started publishing shorter pieces, I think I started to realize after a couple of those came out, and then that I was working on the book, I was like, oh, I see what's happening. I'm releasing these singles, working up to the album, which is this. And so there's all these interesting similarities to me, and of course all the touring stuff I talked about those are the musical connections, I think.
Yeah. Speaking as somebody from a very different point of view, but also has a musical background and also writes, that sense of the cadence of the writing absolutely rings true. I don't know if that's the writers in the room, if anybody else resonates with that, but it definitely does with me. I would say too that an album also kind of has a structure, not exactly like a book, but might have sort of a first act and a second act, even if it doesn't have,
That makes sense. Yeah, this sort of layout, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
You mentioned earlier, excuse me, that you're married and you have a couple of children.
No children.
Oh, no
No,
children.
no.
Oh, my husband withdraw my question.
You made that part. But married, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But does your life experience inform whether you will have children?
That's a good question. That's a common question too.
Yeah.
Well, my life experience probably does, but more specifically, I don't think my father's situation does. There's not a part, and my wife and I talk about having children, she's younger than I am. There's not a part of me that thinks, but what if I'm a bad father like my father? And I don't know if that's what either of you are asking, but that is something
that's not what I'm
something that people ask. And so to me, that's not part of it. Certainly my life experience does, but I think in a good way in that, obviously these are way different times than when I grew up, but the idea that like, do not need to have a traditional family and a traditional play, like anything can work as long as certain key elements are there. That's a big thing for me. I mean, especially, I talk about this in the book, but my mother had a brother and, you know, a nice house in Long Island, and a father who was a lawyer in the city, and a mother, you know, the perfect family on paper, but it wasn't perfect. And I had a perfect childhood that looks crazy and terrible on paper.
Right. Wonderful. Well, I cannot speak more highly of the book. I've read it twice. I have two, I want you to know I have 2 copies, by the way. I'm very into, the book jacket. I want to finish with the book jacket. So this is the most beautiful book jacket. Don't you love this?
Yeah.
I love
It
it.
makes
Thank
you happy. I mean, in a time when we need to be happy. It's sunny, as the title
Yeah.
suggests. But it's, and like I said before, so cute. But I want you to know I have another one at home where the book jacket is destroyed.
Oh, wow.
So I had to buy a second one,
Oh,
because I'm really into having a nice book jacket. And I always say to my kids, take the book jacket off.
Right.
Take the book jacket off when you read the book and put it aside.
Right, people do that. I never thought to do
Oh,
that. but
because
that's
I like a nice album jacket. I
Right,
like a
right,
nice
right.
book jacket.
Okay.
And you'll be happy to know that your uncle's album is in our home too.
Oh,
And I made my husband put a sleeve over it.
wow.
I remember the
Why are we doing
That's
this? Because it's a collector's item.
There's one thing about the cover I want to tell you, because
Oh,
you can
tell
go
us,
into the
tell
cover,
us.
which is interesting. So this guy, Rodrigo Carell, designed it, who I love, and who does a lot of, like, he always is on the New York Times best covers of the year list, which this did not make, but should have. But, so the first version I saw of this definitely didn't have the Michelle Zoner quote, which of course the publisher wanted to put on the cover, and also didn't have this, searching for my father, discovering my family. So when I first saw it, it was exactly this, without that text, and this was just this empty circle. And I loved it, and I remember thinking, like, because he'd read the book, we talked about it, I think this was like, that could be my father, that could be my uncle,
Yeah, or it
that
could
could
be
be
the
my
son.
other, who knows what it is, it could be anything. It was really powerful, and the publisher is like, hey, we want a little tagline, searching for my father.
So
And
this
like,
was not your original subtitle.
there wasn't one.
There was no subtitle.
And I'm, as someone who runs a record company and wants the record to do, or book to do well, of
Yeah.
course said like, yes, I understand, that makes sense, let's do it. But to me, it really took away the circle,
The art.
because nobody notices that or thinks about it, and when it was empty, it was pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that and for sharing your wonderful
Thank
story
you,
with
Jamie,
us.
this has been great,
And for the
appreciate it.
evening, and thank you all for
Thanks, everyone.